I think art is very similar to writing, and we're going to use writing or becoming a writer as a metaphor for becoming an artist, because we're all familiar. We've all gone through school. We've all been through that system that's trained us to first learn how to write. I remember being in first grade, and first we would do things like this. We would make circles, and then after you do your circles, you're going to do like an upside down cane or a tail, and then when you combine them, you get an A. And then you would do this over and over and over. And then we do telephone cables as well. We do all kinds of stuff like that. And this wasn't writing, but this was preparing you for writing. Now, with art, we need to go through a very similar process in order to be able to go through the mundane, the technical, the prerequisites, essentially, for expression. When you're in the first grade, you can't really write complicated essays and do a qualitative analysis of something that was given to you. You can't do any of that stuff. But you can definitely handle doing the circles and doing the tails and then combining them. And then maybe second, third grade, you get to write some more complex sentences. You get to write some paragraphs. You write your first essays. It's a skill that's been developed. Expression comes with the development of technical skill, and then it gets combined with your inspiration, with your research, with all of these other things that you want to be expressing. Another reason why I think that art and writing are suitable as a metaphor is because there is a definite language that underlies visual communication. There is a definite visual language. In fact, there's multiple different visual languages. Why I call it a language is because there is a structure. Very much like in verbal language, there is a grammar for visual expression. If you want to create space, if you want to create volumes, if you want to portray actors doing certain things in a certain space, you need to be able to speak the language of visual space. You need to understand how to create the illusion of space on a two-dimensional surface. And there are definite rules to how this works. Why I'm saying this is because when I get questions from beginners, to a beginner, everything kind of looks mystical in a way. A beginner will take a lot of things and put them out of order. They'll arrange them in a crazy order. And it seems like a crazy order to someone who can see the bigger picture of what's actually involved in making something. But to the beginner, they've heard something from somewhere, and with the limited information that they have, they're trying to put it together into whatever would make sense. Drawing is a compound skill. It's made up of multiple skills, which need to be trained individually and made to work together. It's imperative to separate and detangle individual skills. A lot of times when a beginner is watching a pro, when they're painting, when they're drawing, they'll be doing several things at once. I call that skill compression. And I was watching Feng Zhu when I was starting out, and I was trying to do what Feng Zhu does. I was trying to repeat whatever process he was using and do the same thing. And the problem is, it never worked for me. Not only that, but I internalized a lot of things that I habituated them. I repeated them over and over, and they weren't serving me. I would look at him do things very quickly and be very fast. And I thought, well, maybe I should go very fast and not really think about what it is that I'm doing, but just kind of put down colors and shapes and all that stuff and see what comes up. Because when you're a professional, when you're a very advanced practitioner, you have improvisation at your fingertips. You have so many things that you have internalized, you have trained deeply, that in fact not being prepared sometimes could be an advantage. You could get a freshness to your work. You could get something that you wouldn't be able to come up with if you were to sit down and think about what it is that you're doing. But for a beginner, it doesn't work that way. A beginner must go the long route. They must do what the master had done, not what they're doing now, but what they did 10 years ago, 15 years ago. When they were learning, that's what we need to do if we want to be doing what they're doing right now. We can't just do what they do now. And this is very difficult to see with mental skills, and because there's just no outside indication that you can't do what they're doing. If we were athletes, if we were just training in the gym together, if you see a weight that's just too big, you can go and you can try it. But when you see a weight that big afterwards, you're just like, well, I tried it. I know I can't do it. You have a visual indicator that you just can't do that thing. With mental skills, there's no such thing. You don't grow a bigger brain. Your head doesn't get bigger. You don't get a second head. You don't get a helmet that you get to wear from the government so that your precious brain doesn't get rattled or anything like that. You don't see any visual indication that anyone is more skilled than the next person. So it's very confusing sometimes, and that's why often, if you see someone using a particular pencil and you don't, well, what pencil is that? How can I get this pencil? What pen is this guy using? How may I obtain it? Is it exclusive? Is that where the magic is? So we mistake the tool sometimes for the skill, and that's just because we have no idea how to go about getting the skill. Hence the next thing, just reading or watching will not make you better. Skills are trained through deliberate practice, same as an athlete would train a skill. We need to think ourselves as athletes. Developing skill is a lot more similar to an athlete being on the field and running, throwing passes, sprinting, doing the same thing over and over, but not grinding, not doing it over and over for the sake of having done it 100 times, but each and every time refining minor motor movements. This is the same thing when you're drawing a line and then you're drawing another line. It's not about if you're training straight lines, it's not about making 10,000 lines. That won't make you any better. If I just grind them out without thinking about it and just go faster and faster, this won't make me better. What will make me better is the attempt to reach some sort of baseline that I set. It's establishing a goal and then trying to go towards that goal with each and every line. Is my line, okay, this one is a bit curved, or is my line angled? I used to always kind of make my lines at a tilt. So this is something that I knew about myself. So then every time I would make a line, I would have to try and kind of angle it downwards until at some point I managed to equalize them so they would go a bit more forward. Except for this one that I just did. This one doesn't count. And then you'll also have tendencies, let's say with shapes. You'll make things a little bit bigger, a little bit thicker, a little bit smaller, a little bit out of proportion. You'll have all of these different tendencies that you need to monitor. And then once you detect them, you need to start improving on those. Again, incrementally and in small ways. If I make things too big, let me try and make it smaller. Now, why is it that I make it too big? Is it that I just approach shapes individually and I don't look at the overall and it just ends up that all of my shapes are slightly out of scale? Or is it that I just spend far too long on one individual area of my picture and as a result of that, I made it bigger because I was kind of over-focused on that and I missed the big picture? There's all of these different cause and effect relationships and you need to be keeping an eye on them because in order to improve, you need to find what the problem is and then with conscious, deliberate practice, work at that in order to refine it, because then you automatically get better. When we get to talking about skills, we'll cover more about that. This is very much related to information overdose trap that we have. So this one here in red, this is actually a trap. When we overvalue maps, when we overvalue information, when we overvalue books and tutorials and courses, and we're constantly going from one to the other, and we're accumulating information, but we're not really spending the same amount of time practicing. Practice to theory should be maybe at least 10 to 1, sometimes 50 to 1. Now there's a time when you might need to just drop all practice. If you've been going in and you've been working hard, or maybe you've been over focused on just working and practicing every day, sometimes there is a time where you just need to drop all practice and just spend some time in reflection, in thinking what it is that you're doing. This is different though to the gluttony of information that we have. We live in a time where you could find 1,000 different courses on the most minor of things, and it feels like with each and every course that you will be getting obviously some more valuable information, so that you have the fear of missing out by not taking every single course, by not participating in every single thing. But by doing too many things, you're never actually getting to develop depth. You're never getting to go deep with any one thing. You're just taking too many courses, too much time to just be studying things. Constantly reading but not doing stuff may give you a lot of information. It may make you knowledgeable about something, but our goal as artists isn't to necessarily be knowledgeable. The practitioner isn't always the person who sees or knows everything. A lot of times, a very high-level performer won't even know that they did something. They just did it because they're so highly trained, they're so well developed, they've drilled correct responses so many times that they just end up doing something that might be amazing. And an observer, a critic, may be looking at that and pinpointing every single thing that's happening, examining it, deconstructing it, but that critic couldn't have necessarily done that same thing. A lot of times, critics are just they're theorists. Our goal is to acquire theory, but then to drill, to learn, to train that, to internalize it deeply in order to be able to use it, and to use it so spontaneously, so effortlessly that we're not even thinking about it, that we're not necessarily even conscious of the technique that we're doing. We're conscious of the image, the message of what we're thinking about what we're doing, not about how it is done. So I want to warn you about going too shallow, spreading thin, going too wide, and not having vertical development. You want to go deeply with something. When you're an artist, you're almost like a martial artist in a way. It's all about what's effective and what gets the job done, not about who knows the most amount of fancy techniques. And hence the saying from Bruce Lee, I don't fear the man who's practiced 10,000 kicks once, I fear the man who's practiced one kick 10,000 times. That is depth over breadth. And so here's where things get a little bit tricky, because this is where we need to strike the balance between practice and information, knowledge. And this is where art is once again like a language. With a language, if you just study the words, if you learn the grammar, that still doesn't make you efficient at that language. Like for instance, when I came to the UK, I couldn't speak. So I knew English before that. I knew grammar. I'd read hundreds of books in English. So I scored very high on tests. So before I came here, I had to take a test. So I had like the highest mark you could possibly have. But I couldn't speak at all. And I found that out when I came here. And the reason why I couldn't speak is because I never spoke. There was never anyone to speak to in English before I came to the UK. So I had a very highly developed understanding of grammar. I had a lot of words, vocabulary, but I just couldn't speak. My tongue just couldn't bend and move and do all the stuff that I had to do. I lacked practice. And again, I'm pushing things more towards the practice part because I think most of us are far more likely to go into the information camp, into knowledge overload camp. And really with the people that I've worked with one-on-one, most of them I found to have far more knowledge than they had skill. They had taken so many different courses. They understood the nuts and bolts of how things are done, but they just couldn't do it. And that creates a different kind of problem. When you know what you're supposed to do and you understand it intellectually, but you're still not able to do, what is the problem? Why does that happen? And that might lead you then to start believing in things such as, well, maybe I just don't have it. Maybe there's a special thing. Maybe that's what talent is. Maybe some people can just do it and maybe I just can't because I understand it. I get what I'm supposed to do, but I just can't do it. What's wrong? And that is the lack of training. What training does is that it speeds up your brain. It makes it so that things that were first very effortful, very difficult, very laborious. At first, you might draw everything like this, just very slowly plotting out each and every point, trying to figure out what each and everything is. But then as you get better, you don't need to think about all these things. You can make more complex things without thinking about it. You start building intrinsic perspective. You start being able to compress things, right? The skill compression that we talked about earlier. When you train something, you're essentially taking information and you're really almost converting it into intuition. You're taking something and you're consciously focusing on it, which is why you need to go slowly as a beginner. And through that continuous engagement with the same thing, your brain starts forming a pattern. Your brain is all about converting things that are happening into patterns. That's how we function. That's how come we speak a language. That's how come we can understand each other without having to sit there with dictionaries and flip through them the way that we used to have to at the very beginning of learning a language. We constantly are automating things and making behavior automatic. This is the same thing that will be happening as you improve at art. Practice ultimately becomes the separator of how much we improve because we all have access now to the information. So really, if we all have access to the same info and the sources are all there and there's so many of them, really what determines who gets better is who's willing to practice more, who's going to re-engage with something that's difficult. And really that's the part that's repelling to everyone. I don't like doing stuff that's hard. Even though I said earlier that I like challenging stuff, it's still some days you just don't want to do it. You just don't want to go ahead and every single time, oh man, it's heavy again, it's hard again. Sometimes it's just sitting in front of it and not wanting to do it is harder than actually doing it. So being able to fight all of these things that are coming up against you, all of those reasons to not practice, all of that resistance, as Steven Pressfield calls it, whoever's able to deal with those more efficiently and master them is the person who gets to improve. Practice is very often, in our current age, the separator. Another thing that's crucial is process, and we're going to talk a bit more about that when we get to our levels. You can see that there's actually a process multiplier over here. So we have all the skill levels and all these different tiers that we can go through, but really process becomes a multiplier. So process is something that you develop over time. Process is your thinking about how you create your image. Should I start with this particular thing that I did last time, or what did happen last time when I tried it? It's learning from previous mistakes, from previous errors, and taking that and developing a more reliable way of working. Now that doesn't seem like much, but since we get stuck in grinding very often and we get stuck in rabbit holes, so we'll go down something and we'll do the same thing over and over and over until it's completely beaten to death and there's no point in doing it. So being able to pull back and essentially, especially if you're self-taught, you are the general and you're the soldier. You need to think about what's happening and what's most helpful right now. Where should we be focusing? What is truly important? And then you need the soldier. You need to also be that person that goes and executes that order. You need to go and like, okay, sir, yeah, you just said we should do this. Okay, I don't really understand it right now, but I'm going to go and I'm going to go forward with what you just said. So you need to be able to pull back and give yourself the strategic view of what's just happening. What is the most important thing we need to work on? And then you need to go and you need to actually get it done. So you have both of those jobs. And even if you are working with someone, even if you have a mentor, if you have a good teacher, it's still on you to be examining what it is that they're saying. How does that apply to you? How does it apply to your art? You're never free, essentially, from having to think about these things, from having to strategize, from having to plan. And the reason why I have this here, even though it's so obvious, is because thinking is one of the things that we will try and avoid at all costs. Thinking is just cognitively expensive. A lot of times it's uncomfortable. You'll have to admit that you just did something that you thought was right, but 6 months later you realized, oh man, I can't believe I just did that. That was the stupidest thing I could have done. And then you have to trust yourself to re-engage with the next thing, that's now going to be the right thing. And what if that turns out to be wrong as well? There was a saying I remember that said that success is going enthusiastically from failure to failure from failure. You just keep going after it. Obviously, our goal is not to fail, it's to reduce the rate of failure, but you do have to come to terms with the fact that when you're studying something that is very complex, there will be a high rate of failure. And the people that make it through are the people that just fell on their face and just kept getting back up as if nothing happened. Like, yeah, oh, did I just fall on my face? Oh, I missed that. I don't know what happened. And then you just do it again, and you do it again, and you do it again. Those are the people that make it. No one gracefully just sails through the entire thing. Everyone is constantly just digging through the mud. There's a saying in weightlifting, and it's that it doesn't get easier, you just get stronger. You can also flip that to it doesn't get easier, you just get better. And this is the same thing in art. It's never easy. There are always things that we don't know, that we've never done before, that how am I even going to do this when you take on a job? And it just needs to get done. No one cares about how you're going to get it done. You just have to figure it out. And you unfortunately figure it out oftentimes by just slapping your face on the ground and getting back up and doing that again. And it's not an efficient way to walk forward, but sometimes that's how you got to do it. And I want to show you that this is a common experience. What you're seeing right now is a book from just about 100 years ago. It was written by Harold Speed. The book is called The Practice and Science of Drawing. And you can see this paragraph here. I'm not going to read you the entire thing, but just check this out. It was not until some time after having passed through the course of training in 2 of our chief schools of art that the author got any idea of what drawing really meant. Okay? He went through 2 different top-tier schools until he says he started even realizing what drawing really meant. Okay? He started having an idea after having gone through 2 schools. That's years and years of training. And not only that, but also it's training that you assume is what you need to be doing because you're going through the top school, right? That's what you needed to get into. That's where you should be going if you want to be getting better. And after 2 of those, he started getting an idea. All right? Imagine what that must feel like. And yet the same person obviously wrote a book afterwards on drawing, on instructing people. So he persevered. He made it through, even though he probably felt at some points that he made some major errors. So this is a very common thing. Now, the reason why I believe that happens is that because as you get better, you're actually able to see things when you're looking back with more context. You're able to see the bigger picture. So everything that you were just doing that was so difficult, that you worked so hard to get, all of a sudden you turn around and you see, oh man, I thought I would just crossed an ocean. It turned out there was like a puddle that I was just swimming through. Like this was nothing in comparison to what I'm seeing right now I'm supposed to be doing. So if you're going through the copying stage, for instance, if you're just training accuracy and you're just trying to make shapes that vaguely at least look like what it is that you're drawing, and you're trying to make them not with 1,000 different lines that make it impossible then to understand what it is that you are trying to draw, as you're training at this stage, as soon as you go to the understanding part and you're like, okay, so those shapes don't really matter. I was supposed to be training perspective instead and doing things 3-dimensionally and building volumes, and those shapes are a result of those volumes. So did I just waste all of this time? Was I not supposed to do that? Could I have just done this? And the thing is, you couldn't actually start here. It's that we feel like we've just done the wrong thing because we've understood a bigger picture. You should actually be enjoying that. It's essentially a sign of victory if you feel like something terrible just happened when you're progressing in that way. Yeah, I know that sounds weird, but I've started to recognize that my skill level has leveled up when I'm feeling like I just discovered what I'm truly supposed to be doing, what I'm actually supposed to be doing. As soon as I feel like, man, you know what, just spent all my time here, I need to now go right here. This is when you need to stop there before you panic and before you rush into the next thing. And you need to just recognize the fact that that means that you just expanded your worldview. You just found out more of this roleplay game world of drawing that we have here, you just opened up a new map. You just opened up a new territory. You now have access to this thing that you couldn't see before. So this is a little bit of a reverse indicator. If you're just feeling like you finally realize what you're supposed to be doing, don't feel bad about it. That's your indication that you are getting better. A level up oftentimes feels not necessarily in the best of ways. It might just feel uncomfortable that you realize just how much more there is. That's good. Take a break, stay in base camp for a little while, then get ready, get to the next mountain.